The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Whoa! Did you step outside early this morning? Below 60. No humidity? Nice. And we're heading into, for a change, a nice weekend. I know it's only Wednesday, but the forecast is for dry weather. Thank goodness for that. It's not over in the West. In the NBA, they will play on Game 5, which will be tomorrow night in Minnesota. The Timberwolves going home after extending the series last night. We will talk about that. There's some real interesting baseball to get to, including how statistics are now going to be figured with the Negro League stats now added. We'll get to that. And it was 44 years ago today that Magic Johnson, who had been on an unbelievable roll, he won the national championship against Larry Bird and Indiana State in 1979. He's the number one pick of the draft in 1979. He leads the Lakers to the championship, and not only that, legendarily replaces in Game 6 Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's hurt. And Magic, who played point guard all year, moved to center, had 42 points, and they wrapped up the series in Philadelphia. He was the finals MVP, and wait a minute, was not the rookie of the year. That went to Larry Bird, and it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Again, it's a regular season award, but when I lay out what they went on, the voters, and it was a lopsided vote. It was 60-2. Only two first-place votes for Magic Johnson as Rookie of the Year, but I will try to make sense of that coming up. Meantime, we don't have many of these in this town. These celebrity connections, where you have a famous athlete with a famous star, an individual, and we've had in the last few weeks this speculation that Mark Davis, the kind of creepy-looking owner of the Raiders, Al Davis's kid with that bizarre bowl haircut that he's got, he's 69 years old, and there had been rumors that he and a beautiful young dancer by the name of Hayden Hopkins, who's 26 years old, they were expecting a child. She shot down those rumors, but, sometimes there'll be rumors that'll be shot down, and then we find out, the rumors are actually true. Well, TMZ is reporting this, and they usually get it right, and they're also going off a statement that Hayden Hopkins made last night to TMZ that, of all people, I don't think if you were given 100 guesses on this, you would come up with this, but according to what is reported by TMZ and what is hinted at by Hayden Hopkins, the father of the child that she is expecting is Joey Gallo of the Nats. Now, he doesn't hit much. He's hitting 138. He's got 58 strikeouts and 109 at-bats. He's a 195 lifetime hitter, but it looks like he's knocked it out of the park here. He apparently is the father of Hayden Hopkins' child. We don't have a due date, but she is showing. She's got a bit of a belly now, and I guess she said in the fall that they will have a baby. Her quote was, "Joey and I are excited to welcome our baby in the fall." So it is not the child of Mark Davis. It appears to be, I guess it's not 100%. There could be someone else named Joey who's the father, but it appears that Joey Gallo, who I guess hasn't been spending enough time in the batting cage with his 138 average, has been spending time doing other things. And so we wish the lovely couple the best for sure. And if he goes into a slump, how would you know it, really, if he's got 58 strikeouts and 109 at-bats? But if he does, maybe it's because he's distracted about becoming a father. I don't think the couple is married. I don't believe so. But this is what TMZ is reporting, that our Joey Gallo of the Washington Nationals, is the father of the baby of Hayden Hopkins, and it is not... And I'm not really surprised by this, but it is not the child of Mark Davis. The two were spotted arm in arm at one point. She says she met Mark Davis in 2002, so maybe that was an old picture. But now she is 26 years old, and according to TMZ, Joey Gallo is the father. All right, NBA last night. We've had close games in this series between Dallas and Minnesota. And we had a close game last night that finally Minnesota was able to close out. They close it out in Dallas. The sweep is tough to do. Even with what Boston did to Indiana, all those games were close. This series has had a couple of close games. In fact, let me run down the scores of the 4 games so far. Let's see. In the Western Finals, Dallas opened up with a 3-point win. They won Game 2 by 1 point. So Game 3 was the only game you could consider to be somewhat lopsided. That was a 7-point win. And last night, Minnesota wins by 5, 105-100. Anthony Edwards was not great, but he was good enough. He was 11 of 25 from the field. He finished with 29 points. And more importantly, they got Karl Anthony Towns, Cat, off the schneid. He couldn't hit the side of a barn. He was 9 of 13 for 25 points last night. He also knocked down some threes, 4 of 5 from 3. So he's got his touch back. It could make it interesting, but again, no team has ever come from 3-0 down to win. I guess it's eventually going to happen. It happened in baseball with the Red Sox famously doing it against the Yankees in 2004. We've had it several times in hockey. It's never happened in basketball, and it could conceivably happen. And, as we go along, if Minnesota wins tomorrow night and they're going back to Dallas where Minnesota has already won on Dallas's floor, then it's possible it goes to a Game 7, as we had last year, between Boston and Philly, as Philly was finally able to close it out. But Boston had fallen behind 3-0 and managed to tie up the series. So we'll have to see. Mike Conley back in this series and healthy, it appears, a big steadying influence for a relatively young team. He had 14 points last night, and after the close win, 105-100, talked to Scott Van Pelt on ESPN about where the T-Wolves are and how this series has gone so far.
First 3 games have been decided in the last 3 or 4 minutes of the game, and we knew if we were going to have a chance to win, we had to take care of those last 4 or 5 minutes of a game. And Anthony Edwards and Cat, until he got in foul trouble, really carried us down the stretch, fourth quarter, and were able to make plays for us and big plays and kind of offset what Luka and Kyrie do. And hey, it's not a sweep. We're going home. We're going to Minnesota, and we're gonna try to get this thing coming back to Dallas.
You mentioned Cat, and God knows that NBA Twitter had mentioned Cat and the 3 for 22 from 3. He had struggled, but he saw it go in, and then he saw it go in a bunch. As a group, I'm sure the belief doesn't waver, but you understand how fragile confidence can be, right, Mike? How much happiness is there among the group for him to see the ball go through the rim?
Honestly, it's just a team full of relief, honestly, because we know how good Cat is and what he brings to our team and his work ethic, and to just see him not get rewarded for the time he puts into the game is frustrating. So for him to play well tonight, finally see the ball go in the hoop, and on top of that get us a W, man, I think it was a good night.
I think that's really instructive, Mike. I mean, he's one of the great players in the league, but I mean, confidence in anything we do in life can be fragile, can't it? It's not, we're not bulletproof, are we?
No, we're not. We're all susceptible to it. No matter how great you are, no matter how much work you put into it, some weeks just aren't your week. Some nights just aren't your night, and you have to be able to mentally get past it. And kudos to him for being able to fight through it and get one tonight.
You can only win one game at a time. Now you have that opportunity to grab another, and you get a chance to go back home. As the leader, your message to your group moving forward is what?
Hey, every game's a Game 7. Every game's our last game. We have to fight. We have to push. We have to claw. We have to foul. We have to do whatever we got to do to win these games, because we can't be thinking far ahead. We can't be thinking about, Game 6 or 7. Game 5 is on our mind. It's the only one that matters. We're going to need every single guy locked in, 1 through 15. Our energy has to be at an all-time high. This is a great Dallas team, and they make you pay when you're not ready to play. So, we have no choice but, have our back against the wall and try to go get it.
We had the young man on, Anthony Edwards, after, I believe it was Phoenix. It feels like it was 100 years ago, and he just told me, I want to kill everything in front of me. And there's just, There's so much about the guy that's endearing. His talent is obvious. We've seen Luka and Kyrie do their thing late. He had his chance to do this tonight on this stage. Mike, what have you seen from him in this postseason in terms of taking the next step in the process of whatever it is he's ultimately going to become?
I think really just owning, his role. He's a star, a young star in our league. He wants to be the best player in the world. In order to be that, he has to find ways to manipulate the game. And as a 22-year-old coming into the playoffs, he's had to learn a lot. He's had to learn on the fly. His ability to read double teams, his ability to make plays for his guys. I think the last few games he's had, close to double-digit assists in all of them, in 7, 8, or 9, in those games. And that's growth coming from a young guy who's able to score by trait. So, he's just a guy that's willing to learn, willing to get better, and that's all you can ask for him at this point.
I'll close with this. I mean, you're not an old man, but you're not 22 anymore, Mike. Just the process of being a vet, being a guy that's been through it and seen stuff. How much do you just relish what it is to be that at this stage of the playoffs and what these games now mean?
Man, honestly, I wake up every day, I'm just super grateful. To be in this league, to be in year 17, playing, it's a blessing playing with these guys. Guys who really want to win, really want to work and do it the right way. Not a lot of people get this opportunity. So I come up, every day, thanking the Lord and just keep going forward. And hopefully, I get blessed with the opportunity to win this next game and keep this thing alive and keep our championship hopes alive.
Mike Conley, 14 points last night in Minnesota's 105-100 win to extend the series. They'll play Game 5 tomorrow night in Minnesota. And if the Timberwolves win, then it really, the pressure really ratchets up. They go back to Dallas for Game 6, and it could possibly extend into the weekend and a Game 7 on the Timberwolves' home floor. So you never know. But reality is, series probably over because no team has ever come from 3-0 down to win. The Celtics, meantime, they wait. No matter what happens in the rest of this series, whether it's settled tomorrow night or whether it goes to a Game 7, the finals don't start until a week from tomorrow. So Boston will be going into this with 10 days rest. The other interesting angle on this is Kristaps Porzingis, who has not played in most of the playoffs, but they believe he'll be healthy enough to start the finals. And two things. One, the size that he gives Boston, so it's an already big team with some help there. And the other part of it is we don't know how he's going to mesh into a team that's on a roll right now. They're coming off a sweep. And, yes, he's a great player. You want to work him back in, but the adjustment period is not something you can afford. You don't want to drop Game 1 trying to get Porzingis used to playing with the lineup again. So it's going to be interesting how they mix him back in. A couple of other quick NBA notes. After this game, Anthony Edwards, who does seem to run to the spotlight even when he's not always worthy of it. He had 29 last night, played well, and got his team to the next game. But he said that he noticed that Micah Parsons, the linebacker for the Cowboys, was in Dallas last night, was wearing a Luka Doncic jersey, and he was also wearing some Adidas AE1s, which are Edwards' signature shoes, Anthony Edwards, AE1s. And so he says they're going to win Game 5 in Minnesota tomorrow night, then come back to Dallas, and he says he's going to bring some nice shoes for Game 6 for Micah Parsons to wear. He found out he wears size 14, and he's going to be back bearing gifts for Game 6. He did this in the Western Conference semifinals after Denver taking a 3-2 lead after Game 5. Edwards was confident that they would come back for Game 7, and he said to the ball boys, the guys working in the locker room, he said, I'll bring you some shoes if we win. And, in fact, they were back, and they won Game 7 on the road. So, long way to go, but there is still life for the Minnesota Timberwolves who win last night. And tonight at midnight, or just before, at 11:59 p.m., is the deadline to either stay in the NBA draft or go back to school. And Bronny James is staying in there. His agent, Rich Paul of Clutch Sports, told ESPN last night that, in fact, Bronny will stay in the draft. He is the number 54 prospect. So, was it 60 picks, right? Each team has his first or second round picks. So of that, you would say that he would be drafted, not necessarily, but what the charting on ESPN says is that he will be a second-round pick. Now, he could get what's called a two-way contract. Each team has 3 two-way deals in addition to 15 regular roster spots. Two-way deals limit players to 45 days on the roster with a corresponding salary with the rest of the season spent in the G League. Two-way deals are often offered to second and third or second-round picks or undrafted players. That would probably make a lot of sense because he hadn't played a lot of basketball. I mean, he didn't get on the court for USC until December because of that horrible heart scare. Fortunately, he survived that. But he started the season late. He's played, less than a full season of college basketball. Didn't light it up. Averaged less than 5 points and 3 rebounds and 3 assists or 2 assists a game. Played only 19 minutes a game. So hasn't played a lot. But because he's Bronny James and because there is that possibility that whoever does take him would get LeBron in the deal. Now, more than likely, a team would take him. Let's say he slips to the second round. A team would take him and then say to the Lakers, okay, how much do you want for him? And the price would be a lot higher than a normal second-round pick because you make LeBron happy, and LeBron runs the show in Los Angeles. It's interesting. Rich Paul said, I'm not putting unrealistic expectations on Bronny. Well, everybody else is. His name is Bronny James. Now, he did handle his interviews very well at the Combine a couple of weeks ago, and he played well. He did very well in the three-point shooting, and he looks like he might be an NBA player. Maybe not necessarily now, but down the road. He's only 6'1". He's not, Dad is 6'7", 6'8", whatever. I think he's 6'8". He's smaller than that, but he may have the ability to play in the NBA, and we'll find out. But he's not going back to college, so either next year he's going to be playing on an NBA roster, he's going to have a two-way deal, or he's going to be playing over in Europe, trying to get his game on track to get into the NBA. Got some football to shift to, a couple of things that we didn't get to yesterday because we spent so much time on Bill Walton. And by the way, there's still a couple of more really terrific things I've got to play for you. Mike Breen's story about how Bill Walton treated his father when they went on a trip out there some years ago. Not only is it a moving story, but Mike tells it in such a great way. We'll get to that in the 10 o'clock hour. And also Jay Bilas with really how good Bill Walton was as a player. I mean, let's face it, his best days as a player happened almost 50 years ago. When he won the championship with Portland in 1977, the rest of his career was marred by injuries, and even at the end, as great as he was with the Celtics, he was the sixth man, averaging 19 minutes a game. So the days of Bill Walton being considered one of the greatest basketball players on earth, that's a long time ago. And Jay Bilas will put that in perspective in the 10 o'clock hour as well. Plus, as we do every Wednesday, we have Orioles preview at 10:30, and today Kyle Bradish is going to join us. Bradish, 7 no-hit innings over the weekend in Chicago, and they took him out of the game. Baseball in 2024. That's the way it goes. 103 pitches, son. You are done. We'll get to all of that as we continue, but up next, some football stuff as the Andy Pollin Show continues on ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
And Mike Keller's in for Tony today. Orioles preview in just over an hour. We'll talk to Orioles starting pitcher Kyle Bradish, who's coming off a spectacular performance over the weekend. 7 no-hit innings. But in 2024, once you exceed the pitch count of 100, doesn't matter what you're doing, you are off the mound. And we'll talk to him about the feelings on that. The Orioles lost last night, but hanging in there, a game and a half out of first place. All right, so yesterday when we spent so much time talking about Bill Walton, I didn't get to something that I'd seen a couple of days before. Ross Tucker does a podcast. Ross Tucker had a journeyman NFL career, bounced from team to team. He was here with the Redskins for a while, played at Princeton, and he's carved out a really nice broadcast career. He does a popular podcast. He does color analysis on the radio for the Eagles. He does a bunch of college football on TV and radio. He's really good. He's really smart. And he had on as a guest a former teammate, LaVar Arrington. And when you look back on the Dan Snyder era, and this was very early in the era because this was 2000. Snyder bought the team in 1999, and this was his first draft. He came aboard, was approved after the draft of 1999. That's when Charlie Casserly was able to get all of the Saints picks basically for the trade up of Ricky Williams, and that worked out very well. And so in 2000, they went for it in free agency with Dion and Bruce Smith and those guys. And in the draft, they had, thanks to what Charlie Casserly had done, the 2nd and 3rd overall picks. At 3, they took Chris Samuels, who had a nice 10-year career as an all-pro tackle. And at number 2, they took a player who they thought and they promoted, and this was typical of the Snyder era, over-promoting. He had a great career at Penn State, but who they thought could be the next Lawrence Taylor. And in fact, after wearing number 11 at Penn State, in an era where you couldn't wear that number in the NFL, there were restrictions on that. What number did LaVar take? He took 56. He took LT's number to further promote the hype. And he was good. He made the Pro Bowl a few times, but his career was marked by injury and then big controversy at the end over a salary dispute. And finally, I think he had to buy his way out. He wound up playing a handful of games with the Giants, tore his Achilles, and that ended his career. But at his best, he was a specimen. I mean, he was a very talented player who probably didn't fulfill his expectations because of the way he was coached and because of the celebrity culture that existed here during the Snyder era. He bought into it, as RG3 bought into it, as others did along the way. Clinton Portis, it was more beneficial apparently to be famous rather than to be a winner. And he had some great plays. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was a very, very talented player. But if you look back on what could have been, it really wasn't here. It just didn't match up to what the hype was all about. So this was Ross Tucker. He I guess had recorded this during the must have been the combine. And LaVar did local radio here for a while. He's doing a radio show on Sirius XM, and sat down with Tucker to talk about the good old days when they played together in the early 2000s here.
So I played for 5 teams over 7 years. And what I tell people is, I believe you were the most physically gifted guy that I've ever played with, the most explosive guy I ever played with. I have a theory on you. All right. Because if you remember that second year, your second year, you went to the Pro Bowl. You were just outrageous. I mean, you would run past K. Mitch, rest in peace, and Robert Jones like they were standing. Like you were the most explosive guys ever around. My theory on you is that like your joints, like your muscles were too explosive for your joints to stay healthy. In other words, like the reason why you had several injuries, obviously you played really hard, but you were just such a freak show and so explosive that, and you've seen this with other NFL players, your joint, like you were more susceptible to injury because of it.
I mean, I split my cartilage. So you're probably right.
Is that what happened?
I mean, the injury that ended my career, well, I wouldn't say ended it. I was done when I blew my Achilles tendon. But I blew my Achilles tendon.
New York or Washington?
In New York. But I blew it because I was off balance. And so it's interesting because that was the injury I kept getting was I kept splitting my cartilage. So every time I take off or I do something or whatever it may be, I would have to go get my knee. Dr. Andrews was cleaning up my knee all the time from split cartilage. And that was what it kind of threw me off balance.
But that's because your cartilage in your knee is like
your cushion.
Yes.
That's your cushion.
And I think you're so explosive. Your muscle, dude, you like coming off the edge, or you when you would hit people, or the big thing to me was you would run past, like if the play was to the opposite side, you would run past the middle linebacker.
I'm going to run it down.
Yeah. I mean, you're I don't know what your 40 time is, but you're like 10, 20-yard burst, just outrageous. Yeah. Outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Is
it frustrating that you weren't, like, do you look back on it and say, man, I was All-American, 2-time All-American, number 2 pick, Pro Bowl, All-Pro, all that stuff, made a bunch of money, had an awesome career? Or is it frustration like, man, I could have been like one of the if I didn't have the cartilage issue, like I could have really been one of like the all-time greats.
And you think
or
of
is it
it,
both?
I think of it every once in a while, but I was pretty dope in college. So I had a 3-year run in college, really two years, and then in the pros I had the second half of my rookie year on into 2004. So 2001, 2002, 2003. So 2004 I dropped off.
And LaVar, 2001. You make the Pro Bowl as an off-the-ball linebacker.
Yeah, they did.
2002, Marvin Lewis
started bringing
has you coming off the edge, and you had like double-digit sacks.
Yeah, I led all.
Did you
all
like
backers?
You actually were doing some of this stuff. They should have done the stuff that they do with Micah in Dallas.
They should have.
You guys are very similar.
Marvin Lewis did that, and I ended up with 11.5 sacks, I believe, that year. So, and then he was gone.
The Spurrier year.
Yeah, then he was gone.
Right.
Like I was telling people, my rookie year, I had Ray Rhodes. My second year, I had Kurt Schottenheimer.
Yeah.
My third year, I had Marvin Lewis. My fourth year, I had George Edwards. My fifth year, I had Greg Williams. So my first 5 years in the league, I had a different defensive coordinator every single year.
Dude, you had 11.5 sacks, and you still weren't rushing all the time.
No,
and we were terrible. We were not a good team. So it's not like we had leads that you were getting. Like you could have had a lot of sacks.
It is what it is. I don't live in the past of it. I really, for me, I do so much. And you mentioned Micah. Like I had an impact on Micah. I've helped mentor some amazing football players. Obviously, I got my whole Stick City stuff.
I love it. I love it.
And, 11's become a number that's synonymous with guys who play the game at a certain level and are certain types of person. And just being a part of that type of tradition and that history.
Dude, you started that.
Yeah.
You started like a real legacy that's still going on at Penn State 25 years later.
And
not many guys do that.
Yeah, but think about it, Tuck. It's branding, right? Really, all it comes down to is having the awareness.
But how do you pick which guy gets to wear it?
It's a process. It's a process. But Coach Franklin has honored that process and has been a very integral part in how the number has emerged and the way that it has. I mean, there were guys before that, even when Joe was still coaching, with Navarro. Navarro was an interesting story. He kept getting into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
And so I told Joe the second time something happened where he was going to get kicked off the team and get kicked off for good, I told him, let me have this summer with him. And me and Navarro spent the whole summer together. And I was like and rest in peace, Carl Weathers. It was kind of like an Apollo Creed, Rocky Balboa moment where it's like you're going into the season. He was number 18. And I was like, you've been with me. I've had a fingerprint on DNA on your change and your growth. I said, switch, rebrand yourself, start anew, and be number 11, be the next Sticks. And he did it. And boy, he
took off after that.
It took off.
That was real.
So it just kind of turned into a thing after that. But then you had somebody, Brandon Bell Ward, amazing. They won the Big Ten. Then obviously, you got Micah, you got Abdul Carter wearing it. So it's been good.
It was a tradition that LaVar started, wearing number 11 at Penn State, and the top, I guess, pass rusher, linebacker gets to wear it there. It's linebacker U. It's been known for that years before LaVar played there. Again, unfulfilled promise. Had some great moments here. It should have been a great career for a variety of reasons, including injuries, as he outlined there. But he did have an impact, and one of the things about that 2001 season, that was the Marty Schottenheimer year, where Kurt Schottenheimer was the defensive coordinator, and he just sort of turned LaVar loose. I mean, that was the thing you heard about LaVar, was he didn't really follow the system. That's why he got benched during the Joe Gibbs years, because he didn't want to follow the scheme. He was doing his own thing, and he was a great pass rusher, there's no question. But they were about to go to 0-6, and they were playing the Carolina Panthers with Chris Wenke, the 28-year-old Heisman Trophy winner, rookie quarterback, and they were about to go up 17-0. They were in position to kick a field goal, put the game out of reach. He threw a pick six to LaVar, and LaVar did have great speed, and he took it back, and that was 14-7. Washington eventually was able to tie it before the end of the game, and they won in overtime, and they went on to win 5 straight. I mean, they went from 0-5 to 5-5 with Marty. And with Tony Banks and one audible, they finished the year 8-8. But that's a little bit of old-time memory with Ross Tucker and LaVar Arrington. A little bit more recent is Louis Riddick, who was a front office executive with Washington, I want to say 10 years ago, and has had a really good, I think, broadcasting career with ESPN. His name comes up from time to time for GM jobs, including here. But he was on with John Keim the other day on his podcast. And if we're looking at historical things versus now, when they did sign what looked to be an over-the-hill player some years ago in London Fletcher went on to have a terrific career here and helped them to get to the playoffs. He was a tackling machine. So now Bobby Wagner comes in. Similar age, similar resume, also won a Super Bowl early in his career. And this is Louis Riddick's take on the comparison of what London Fletcher was able to do here with what Bobby Wagner might be able to do here.
The system was one that he already knew. So he was like an extension of Greg Williams on the field. Bobby can be the same thing for Dan. It's a system he already knows. That now he can just he can give you those extra inches in terms of this is how you can really excel in this system to everyone else. Mm-hmm. These are the things that he's really, that Dan's really trying to get across to you. Let me give it to you from a player's perspective, not just from the coach's perspective. And let me show you how to do it in real time. And then let me show you how to be a professional in real time, day after day after day after day after day after day after day. And those are the kind of things that London did when he was there. And in the command and control center, which is really what the Mike Backer position is, you've got to have that. You've absolutely, you just have to have a guy who has those qualities. And then when you combine it with having those qualities in this specific situation where, you know, he's really an extension of the play caller on that side of the ball. And in this particular situation, he's an extension of the head coach. Those are the home run free agent signings. Those are the kind of situations that you're looking for, because those are the ones that usually work out the very best. And, you know, we saw it. We saw it. Look, when London came back in those years in the mid 2000s, remember now Philip Daniel was kind of had the same impact on the team on the defensive line because he was an extension of Greg Blash, who had known him in Chicago. It's those kind of things. Walt Harris, as good as he was, because Greg knew him as well. Although Walt couldn't stay healthy, it was the same kind of thing, the exact same kind of thing. Those are the signings that always pay off for you. And I'm hoping that Bobby pays off for them in the same way.
So a thumbs up from Louis Riddick, who was part of the London Fletcher acquisition, which did work out. We'll see how Bobby Wagner works out for them as well. And by the way, if you missed this yesterday, we played Riddick and his praise, and he was one who was saying before the draft, Jane Daniels is on the board at number one. You take him number one. You don't take Caleb Williams. It didn't mean that Caleb Williams won't be a great player, but he truly believes in Jaden Daniels. So real thumbs up on that. The last thing from Riddick, he was here during the days that Fletcher played here. He was here during the Joe Gibbs years. He was also here working in the front office during those two Steve Spurrier seasons when Spurrier tried to win with his ex-Gators, couldn't get it done. I mean, we could do 2 full hours on Spurrier stories. He didn't necessarily tell Spurrier stories here, but this was Louis Riddick asked about what it was like working under the head coaching of Steve Spurrier during the 2002-2003 seasons.
It was just that wasn't pro football for me. Like Joe epitomized again that kind of steady professionalism and competency that you're looking for. Like I had come from a time in football where like I played for Belichick and Saban, dude, right, at the same time. I mean, you're talking about graduate level stuff, not just from what they're teaching you, but from the way in which they expect you to conduct yourself, the way in which meetings were organized, practices were organized, scripts were put together, the way you were, required to prepare, how you were held accountable. There was none of that at that time. There was none of that. I mean, so it was just, Greg Williams, I believe, was the one who coined the phrase, it's hard enough to win because of in the NFL. It's impossible to win in spite of. And we were winning in spite of, there being, just chaos at different points in time. And you can't win that way. You can't win consistently. I mean, you can rise up and have a couple good games here and there, but you're not going to win consistently. And that's what those times remind me of, unfortunately.
Yeah, Marvin Lewis was running that show that first year. That's why it was 7. And that's why they had any sort of chance whatsoever. You remember the stories of them going down for the first practice, and coach saying, we'll offensive practice here and defensive practice there, and Marvin goes, "No, we can't do that. We don't have enough guys. We have to practice together here." Like that right there tells you that. Come on, that's what you were battling. There was one time, and I tell the story a lot, that when you guys are on, and it's a draft, and this is back when the media was in the building, right? And we're sitting there talking to Spurrier at the door to go in the media room, and he looks up at the TV. He's like, "Oh, we're on the clock. I better go." Like, this is a draft.
Yeah.
That's
just the way, that's the way things were. And you know what? Look, man, there's a lot of people who love Coach Spurrier and a tremendous amount of respect for him. And look, he was successful as heck in college football, and you'll never be able to take that away from him. But the NFL is it's a different animal. And I think we all found that out at that point in time.
And Spurrier found that. He's admitted that it wasn't for him. And he said at the time, 2002, when he took the job, they weren't paying college coaches like they pay them now. There was no Nick Saban making $10 million a year. You want to get paid to go to the NFL. And so that's why he wanted to try it. He said if it came along today, he wouldn't have taken it. He would have stayed at Florida and maybe tried to win another national championship. But he was not cut out to be in the NFL. And the story's even better than the way Riddick tells it about the two fields. Marvin Lewis was hired by Dan Snyder. Snyder got nervous enough hearing about Spurrier and the way he only cared about his offense. He didn't even learn the names of his defensive players. So he thought he should get somebody. So he paid Marvin Lewis, who had been the architect of that great defense in Baltimore, to come here and made him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the league. And as John Keim said, that kept them at least respectable. They won 7 games that year that he coached. But as the story goes, Spurrier calls up Marvin Lewis, and he goes, "Well, Marvin, I guess we're going to be working together." He says, "We got 2 fields out here at the old Redskins Park. Which field would you like to have?" And Marvin Lewis had to explain to him, "Steve, this is not college football. We don't have 110 players on the roster. We only have 53. There aren't enough players so you can practice against one another on separate fields. You can't do that." "Oh, okay then." That's kind of the way things went down during those crazy Spurrier years. It would make a tremendous 30 for 30. There'd be a lot of laughs in there. And Tucker himself has a lot of great stories about playing for Spurrier. Spurrier cut him, and he has no love lost for him. But I mean, it's just some of the things that went on here. Coming up, it was 44 years ago today that Magic Johnson, who had led the Lakers to the championship, was the MVP of the finals, came up way on the short end of Rookie of the Year. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Orioles preview coming up at 10:30. We'll talk to Kyle Bradish of the Orioles as they lost last night to the Red Sox, but hanging in the race, a game and a half out of first place. And some of the questions that have to be answered prior to the trade deadline: are they secure enough in the bullpen? Do they need to add another bat? Those things are up for debate right now. Mike Elias will make those decisions, but this is not going to be a year where it would be great if the Orioles just make it to the playoffs. This is a year where you think maybe they can possibly make a run to win it all. I mean, it's more of a crapshoot than it's ever been before in baseball, because you got to go through wild card and all these different rounds. It's far from the way it used to be, like when you just had to win a best of 5 series and then get to the World Series. A lot more steps now, so anything can happen along the way. So 44 years ago today, they awarded the Rookie of the Year in the NBA. And this was a watershed year for the NBA, because off their matchup in the championship game, I think to this day, the highest rated NCAA championship final ever, Magic versus Bird, even though it wasn't a great game. Magic and the Michigan State Spartans beat Indiana State and Larry Bird for the championship. Bird had been drafted a year before as a junior eligible by the Boston Celtics, another shrewd move by Red Auerbach. You know, he knew he wasn't going to get him that year, but was willing to wait a year, which he did. So Bird comes into the NBA as a player who was drafted the year before. The Lakers, with Jerry West making some shrewd moves, traded away an aging Gail Goodrich to the New Orleans Jazz so he could get their number one pick or their first-round pick, which turned out to be number one. And what do you know? You get to draft one of the greatest players in the history of the game in Magic Johnson. And he was something that the NBA had never seen before, a 6'9" point guard. They had a guard who had played the point the year before, a point guard size point in Norm Nixon, but Nixon moved to the shooting guard because you wanted Magic with the ball in his hands, not just for the way he could score, but the way he could pass. One of the all-time great passers. And he rejuvenated Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was then in his early 30s, got him back on track. And that team got to the finals. They were playing the Philadelphia 76ers, and Magic Johnson, who had come from national champion at Michigan State, I believe he was College Player of the Year, number one pick of the draft, takes the Lakers to the championship series and fills in for an injured Kareem in Game 6 of the finals, scores 42 points playing center, and is named the finals MVP. But a few weeks later, where they give out the Rookie of the Year, it goes to Larry Bird. And as Magic remembered when he was talking to Sterling Sharp a couple of years ago, the voting wasn't even close.
It was 60-something to like 2. I hate to say that, too. I got to say that on TV. And so I was pissed, man. I was mad.
You like, hold on. I led a team to the NBA, and I couldn't get but 2 votes.
2 votes, became the first rookie in NBA history to be named Finals MVP.
Yeah.
I was only the 3rd dude ever in NBA history to go from the college championship to the NBA Finals championship. And so I get like 2 votes. And they were 2 LA dudes. You know, I'm like, okay, he's not that much better than me.
Right.
Not 63-2.
Right.
But okay, I took it. But our relationship, Shannon, was fractured because Celtics, Lakers.
Right.
See, we hated them, they hated us.
Right.
So we can never be friends.
Right.
And Pat Riley stressed that.
Right.
He said, I don't want, if a Celtic go to the ground, you better not pick him up.
Right.
And so we had to hate him to beat him.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It wasn't until 87 I went out, Converse wanted to do a commercial with both of us.
Okay.
I flew out to French Lick, Indiana, where he's from.
The weapons, the cons.
Exactly. So he had the black one, I had the purple and gold one.
Right.
So we shot about half the commercial, a little bit more, and it's lunchtime. So I'm thinking I'm going to my trailer, because we really haven't broken bread before like this. So as I'm taking about 3 steps toward the trailer, he said, Magic, man, I'd like you to have lunch with me up at the house. My mom has prepared lunch. He threw the mom, you know, my you know I can't say no.
You can't say no.
He just threw the mom in there.
Okay.
So I go to the house, you know, and he's down there, I'm down here. She's bringing out all the dishes. And she brought that last one and set it down. And she hit him, said, did you tell him yet? And Larry said, no, Mom, you tell him. She turned and said, Magic, you my favorite basketball player. And I just said, oh, man. Thank you, Mom. That was it. And then we started talking.
Right.
Like 2 little boys.
Right.
And, you know, we're similar. We grew up poor. We're both from the Midwest. We love the game. We love to win, you know, on and on and on. And that's when our friendship evolved and grew. And we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, it's kind of like Martina and Chris. Great rivals sometimes become great friends because nobody understands the other like the other. And they were same size, 6'9". Bird was slower. Magic wasn't particularly fast, but they were just basketball geniuses. And the perfect storm of Magic going to the Showtime Lakers, which fit his personality, and Larry Bird going to the blue-collar Celtics, which fit his personality. I mean, you couldn't have written it any better than it played out for the NBA over those years. Now, let's look at the MVP or the Rookie of the Year voting, as Magic had great numbers. He played 77 games for the Lakers that year. Remember, it's only a regular season award, so they're not factoring in what he did to lead the Lakers to the championship. But in 77 games, he averaged 18 points, 7.7 rebounds, 7.3 assists a game. You'd take those numbers any day of the week. Bird's numbers, he's a forward, not a guard, a little bit different, so the assists are lower. He had 4 assists, but he had 10 rebounds a game and 21 points. So he had more points and more rebounds per game, fewer assists. And his team lost to Philadelphia in the Eastern Conference Finals. That's not factored in its regular season. But here's the big thing that I look at in this lopsided vote. You got to remember this about the 79-80 Celtics. Bird and Parrish and McHale were not there. So the greatest front line maybe in NBA history didn't come together until the following season. That was when McHale came out of Minnesota, and the Celtics, once again, really shrewd trading by Red Auerbach. They had the number 1 pick. That was Joe Barry Carroll. They traded that to the Golden State Warriors for an underachieving Robert Parrish, who had been there for a few years, and the number 3 pick of the draft, which turned out to be Kevin McHale. It's one of the great trades in history. Joe Barry Carroll became, as was called by Peter Vesey, Joe Barely Cares. Just a so-so NBA career, and these 3 were part of just a complete dynasty there in Boston. But the other players who were on the roster, along with Larry Bird in that 79-80 season, this was an aging bunch, guys over the hill. Tiny Archibald in his 30s, Don Chaney in his mid-30s, Dave Cowens, mid-30s, Pete Maravich, mid-30s. Great players in their day, all over the hill. Even Chris Ford, who was the first ever to hit a three-pointer in the NBA, he was in his 30s. This was an aging roster that Larry Bird dragged along to win 61 games that year. They didn't get to the finals, but they were a hell of a regular season team with a roster around Bird that just doesn't measure up. Yeah, there's some names there. Tiny Archibald, Pete Maravich, Dave Cowens. You'd love them all in their prime. They weren't in their prime at that point. Whereas with the Lakers, you got to realize what they had. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the best player in the game, and he was a little older, but not that much older. He was 33 years old. 33 for a big man is not as big of a deal. Michael Cooper was 24 years old. Norm Nixon was a very, very good player in his mid-20s. Jamal Wilkes in his mid-20s, another great player, part of the Walton gang at UCLA. And they also had some good complementary players who had really good careers. Jim Chones played some center. Spencer Haywood, who was older but had success in the NBA. They had talent on that team. I would say that Laker team had more talent than the Celtics team did around Larry Bird. You could flip a coin as to who would be Rookie of the Year if you just placed them in the middle of the desert and said put 4 guys around them. I don't know which way you would go. They were both incredible. But if you look at the vote and you go, geez, how is that possible? How is it possible that Bird got 60 first-place votes and Magic got only 2, and Magic was the MVP of the finals with one of the great finals performances ever? Well, again, that's not factored in, and you also have to look at the rosters around them. But, boy, what a beginning that was for that. And as Magic's explanation of how they became friends doing that commercial, you remember that commercial with Magic stepping out of the limousine in French Lick with those purple and gold Converse shoes that they wore, and that's what bonded them, because they didn't get along. They had actually played together in an all-star situation earlier in their careers, but they didn't know each other. And as Magic explained, that's when you really hated your opponent. Those finals, and they hadn't played in the finals yet in 79-80 as the Lakers won that year, and then with Parrish and McHale the following year, Bird won the championship in 1981, and we were off and running with, I think, the greatest decade in the history of professional basketball. All right, coming up in the next hour, we'll talk to Kyle Bradish as we do Orioles preview, plus A great story left over from the Bill Walton tributes told by Mike Breen that you won't want to miss. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I'll spend some more time on this tomorrow after I have more time to peruse this, but like in the last 15 minutes or so, the Washington Post has put out a story about a survey of the name of the Commanders. And Jason Wright, who put like 2 years of work into this, has got to feel like a schmo on this. According to the poll, most sports fans, 54%, say they either dislike or hate the name Commanders. Among just local fans, the apathy toward the name is even more. 58% say they don't like it. Only 16% say they should keep the name. Most say they would like to see it changed to a different name again. I've said this a number of times. I agree with what Tony Kornheiser said a number of months ago, or actually before the name even changed. He said, keep Washington football team, because you're never really going to satisfy people who grew up watching a team called the Redskins, and they're never going to be the Redskins again. It's not going to happen. But I would be in favor of changing the name, and I would change it to that or a variety of other names. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they were a terrible team again last year. That if they had been a good team with the Commanders, I think the poll results might be a little different. But it's an uninspiring name. The rollout was really sloppy with Snyder and his wife wearing those dopey Letterman jackets and telling everybody how great Commanders was. And then the mascot that they came up with, Major Tutty, give me a break. Ugh. So, yeah, that's just more fuel. And Josh Harris was asked, I think it was at his opening news conference about the name, and he said, we're not going to make the decision. The fans are going to make that decision. Well, according to what this poll results are, the fans have made their decision, and the decision is the name stinks. Only 16% want to keep it. All right, couple of leftover Bill Walton stories. I wanted to play this from Jay Bilas on yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show, and we've talked a lot about what he was as an announcer and what he was as a human being. But what he was as a basketball player, Jay Bilas got to see that as a very young kid growing up in Los Angeles when Walton was playing for UCLA and in his early days with the Portland Trail Blazers. And he was an inspiration for his life. And Bilas, who knows as much about college basketball as anyone, outlines just how good Walton was.
I first started playing basketball third, fourth grade. So he was National Player of the Year, and at UCLA they were winning championships and all that. And when you meet your idol and he exceeds your expectations, that's got to be pretty rare, at least in my experience. And he exceeded every one of the expectations I had of him, which were really high.
And I talk about, I named my intramural team after Walton, called the Walton Gang. And because it was a tribute to the teamwork that he had, that he expected, that he hoped for. He had that simplicity. He wanted perfection, but he knew what simplicity meant. And having John Wooden there as his coach, and I fell in love with the ability to be selfless but be the best player in college basketball, which is really hard to do. And, taking that style into that Portland team in '77, that's the most selfless, champion I've ever witnessed, and didn't have really star power. Had Bill and Mo Lucas and Jack Ramsey, but that ability, that innate ability to see a game differently. I mean, we marvel at Joker now. Bill did Joker-like things, 50 years ago.
Yes. Aside from bringing the ball up court, I think maybe you put Wes Unseld in this category, maybe even Kevin Love, but to me, he was the best outlet passer that ever lived. He could go up and get a rebound at or above the square of the backboard and turn in midair, and that ball was gone down court for a break. He could really run before he was injured. And I think his NBA career, Dan, I mean, we're about the same age. You remember that stuff. Like, he was probably the Sandy Koufax in a way of the NBA, that when he was healthy, it was him and Kareem were the best centers, and that was it. And I think it was him and Kareem as the best players, not just the best centers, but the best players to ever play college basketball. I mean, he was 86-4 in his college career. In 3 years, he went 30-0, 30-0, 26-4. And his senior year in 1974, they lost. They called it the lost weekend in Sports Illustrated. They lost back-to-back to Oregon and Oregon State. Digger Phelps and Notre Dame ended that 88-game winning streak, and then they lost in double overtime to David Thompson and NC State in the Final Four in Greensboro, North Carolina. That was it. And teams used to stall against them, you name it. But I remember, my coaches when I got to college. The trainer at Duke was a guy named Max Crowder, and he insisted Bill Walton's the best player I've ever seen. And they all talked about him being the best. And then you get to know him later on, and he was later on in his career he became a showman, but he wasn't necessarily like that off the court. He was goofy and fun. But hey, can I read you a text message he sent one time?
Sure.
You have time for that?
Absolutely.
So I played golf with a high school buddy of mine named Steve Howard. And Steve was a deadhead, or still is a deadhead, has gone to dead shows for 35 years. And he and Bill became friends through dead shows. So Steve and I played golf this last summer, and while we're playing, we decide, hey, let's send a video to Big Red. So we sent a video to Bill, and this was his response. And I'll do it in his voice. Awesome, terrific, Steve and Jake, two of my heroes. Thanks for your kindness, patience, and my life. On your golf adventure, Jake mentioned going low. Please remind him I'm much better going high. May the four winds blow you safely home. May you stay forever young. May you stay forever, Steve and Jake. With eternal gratitude and boundless everything, I miss you, I salute you, I thank you. BW. From the bright side of the road, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. That's his response. And he sent that kind of stuff to everybody. I mean, everybody that I've shared this with said, oh, they sent one back to me. They got something similar. I mean, he was one of a kind.
Yeah, he was. And that was a great story told very well by Jay Bilas. This is the final word on Bill Walton for the rest of the week, and did a lot of tributes to him yesterday from various people, but none was more moving than this one. And Mike Breen telling a story to Malika Andrews the day, not yesterday, but the day before, the day that the news was announced, about a personal experience that he had with Bill Walton and his family. This was Mike Breen on ESPN.
Yeah, I've been telling this story for about 15 years now. When anybody ever asks me, what's Bill Walton like? And it's a little long, so I apologize. And I hope it's appropriate because it has to do with my family, but I think it's a great way to describe what Bill was all about. So my dad had Parkinson's disease, and it started to get advanced to the point where we were afraid he wasn't going to be able to travel much. He didn't really want to go out of the house much. So my younger brother, Pete, gave me a great idea. He says, before Dad can't travel, why don't we take him out to San Diego, where the USS Midway is stationed as a museum. My dad served on the Midway during the Korean War and had not been on the aircraft carrier since he left the service. So we made plans to go, and of course Bill lived in San Diego, so I called him to get a hotel recommendation that was near the Midway. And of course Bill was like, you're not staying in a hotel, you're staying with me. And I convinced my father and my brother, and the three of us went, and we were going to spend 3 days at Bill's house. And when we got there, first thing Bill did is he put my father in the Bob Dylan room. The bedrooms were all named after people that meant something to Bill, and usually that's something to do with musicians. And the Bob Dylan room was a place of honor. So that's the first thing he did. Well, Malika, for the next 3 days, he did not leave my father's side. Wherever we went, wherever we ate breakfast or lunch or dinner, he was seated right next to my father. If we went for a drive in the car, my father was in the front seat next to him. And always like, John, you're next to me. John, you're next to me. Didn't leave him at all. And then when it came time to go to the Midway, we thought we were just going to go and buy tickets like everybody does who wants to go take the tour. But when we got there, Bill had called in advance, and he called to tell them that one of your heroes is returning to the ship that he served on. So the commander of the Midway is the one who greeted us. And we went on for about a 2-hour tour. And let me tell you, an aircraft carrier is no place for a 7-footer, especially one with back problems and knee problems because they're small little areas. You've got to duck everywhere you go. And it was a painful walk for him. But he walked every step, again, right by my father's side. And it was very emotional for my dad to go back. And there were a couple of times where he broke down. And so, of course, my brother and I got emotional as well. And then I look at Bill, and he's got the tears streaming down his cheeks. And it was a special day for him and having Bill next to him. And we get back to the house, and there was one point I couldn't find where my father was and didn't know where Bill was either. And the two of them are back in the teepee. Bill had this huge teepee that was on the ground at home, and the two of them are back there, sitting there, just talking. So by the end of the 3 days, Bill wasn't my friend. Bill was my father's friend. And when he came back, he didn't live much longer after that. But that's all he talked about. My mother, who's still alive, has said that he talked about those 3 days over and over again. They were the best 3 days of the late years of his life, which were difficult for him. And Bill made them the best 3 days. And when I had the good fortune of getting the Gowdy Award up in Springfield, of course, I took my family and my mother, and there were so many NBA dignitaries. She was not interested in meeting any of them except one. She had to meet the man who did that wonderful thing for her husband.
That's a great story, and told about as well as you can tell it by Mike Breen. So amazing things that some things you didn't know about Bill Walton that you find out, and just incredible. Didn't have a lot of time for this today. We got to get to Orioles preview, but it's fascinating to me as someone who grew up with baseball numbers that were mythical. You know, I remember before Hank Aaron broke the Babe Ruth record that 714 was sacred. That was the Babe Ruth number. 406 was Ted Williams' lifetime batting average. And over the years, because of steroids and other things, those numbers have become muddied. Not the Hank Aaron 755 career home runs, but, you know, what do you think of Barry Bonds in 762? And there seemed to be obvious use of performance enhancers. The 61 home runs that we grew up with Roger Maris. We maybe now have a clean one at 62 with Aaron Judge. Do you buy Barry Bonds at 73? I don't know. But now we have more numbers that are added into the mix, as Major League Baseball is going to use as best as they can, because the record keeping wasn't great for the Negro Leagues, but it was a great injustice to these great players who were not allowed to play in Major League Baseball because of this absurd color line that wasn't broken until 1947. So once we mix in these numbers, not that most people would know that Ty Cobb is considered to be the holder of the greatest average of 367 for career batting average, which is higher than Ted Williams. But Josh Gibson now comes in with a 372. Never spent a day in the major leagues. His 466 average for the 1943 season, I mean, how do you look at that compared to what Ted Williams did? Slugging percentage for Josh Gibson, greater than Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth has had it for all these years. How do you look at it? And I understand what they're doing here. This is something that was a terrible thing, and these guys should be recognized for what they did. The problem is the record keeping is spotty, and we don't really know. Like, for example, they're going to add to Satchel Paige's major league totals. Remember, Satchel Paige didn't make it into the major leagues until he was with his 40s with the St. Louis Browns, and he won 98 games. So they're adding 28 wins to his win total. Well, he may have won 300 games in the Negro Leagues because they used to pitch him all the time. But the record keeping is hard to come up with. They're doing the best they can with newspapers and so forth. I think the most important thing is that these are realized as real numbers. I think that's the big thing here. And as time has gone on, and because of the way the steroid era has kind of muddied the waters on numbers, and now with pitching, we're never going to see somebody win you 30 games in a season. That's going to be impossible. You won't even get enough starts, much less the opportunity to pitch deep into games. We're just not going to see the numbers that we saw in the past. So why not? Because the numbers that we grew up, people my age grew up with as sacred, they're not sacred anymore. They're just not. Baseball is almost a totally different game than the one that was played for, most of his existence, most of the years of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all those years. It's, that's why a guy like Joey Gallo is playing on a regular basis, hitting 138. He wouldn't be in the major leagues, but he hits enough home runs. Not that many, though, this year. He's got 4, but has had enough home runs during his career. Kyle Schwarber, a leadoff guy who hits 210, but hits 45 bombs. He's considered to be a valuable player. So I have no real problem recognizing these numbers. Some of the purists might, but it's hard to make a case against players who were good enough to play in the majors and because of their skin color weren't allowed to do so. Coming up, Orioles preview. We'll talk to Kyle Bradish, who had a spectacular performance over the weekend in Chicago, as we continue with the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.